It is Africa rather than India that I think is going to inherit the workshop of the world mantle. And I think we'll see that really start to move by the end of this decade. There are people which will be watching this podcast today who have no idea that their careers will be in Africa at the end of this decade. But Emmanuel Macron, I think, wants to be seen as the senior political leader in the EU. CAI is a bilateral investment treaty. It's not actually such a big deal. It's not a free trade agreement, but it is a significant, it's significant, I think, in its political statement. And if people are interested in learning how to exploit what China has been doing, and I really do mean that, exploit it, then I think that there are some significant financial investments and returns on investments that can be made on a global basis through the Belt and Road Initiative.
Chris Devonshire-Ellis, the founding partner of Dezan Shira and the editor of Asia Briefing. Thank you for coming out to Hey China.
You're welcome. Good to be here.
I know you just recently published a big book on the Belt and Road Initiative. The BRI, since it was raised in 2013, we are coming into the 8th year now. So give us a sense of how big is the total investment in the BRI at the moment?
Well, the investment from China alone has been somewhere in the region of about $4 trillion, so a significant amount. But in addition to that, there's been other foreign governments have also invested money. So sovereign wealth funds from around the world have also been putting in. So the true figure is a little bit difficult to ascertain. I think probably the total spend, it's not unreasonable to suggest, would be between about $5 to $6 trillion. So nearly $1 trillion a year, continuously for the past few years. A significant and huge amount of money.
There have been a lot of speculation about the total size that China is willing to put into the Belt and Road Initiative. And so you are saying now China has pumped about $4 trillion. Where is the end?
Infrastructure is a capital spend, and once a bridge or a port or a railway is built, the only additional spend that is then required is the ongoing maintenance of that, and of course some improvement in standards as technologies improve. So I think that the spend, although it's not coming to an end, is going to come to a natural slowdown. China won't be needing to spend quite as much as it has done in the last few years, because a lot of the infrastructure projects are coming now to fruition.
Mm-hmm. And all across the BRI now, it's essentially covered every major continent except virtually North America. So give us a sense of which continent receives the biggest part of the pie.
Well, that is going to change. But at the moment, without a doubt, it's been Asia, linking the infrastructure in East Asia. And it's not just the infrastructure build, it's also soft infrastructure, such as the RCEP agreement that China has, the tax issues. But essentially, it's been Southeast Asia that has received the bulk of that, connecting China very much so to the ASEAN nations. The next phase is, which has been ongoing all the time, is Central Asia, although that is dependent to some extent on the outcome of the Afghanistan peace process, which is ongoing and has some bumps in the road. Africa is interesting, huge amounts of development going in there, and to some extent South America. So all of these things are happening. But the overall trend, I think we're going to see perhaps a slowdown of infrastructure spend in Southeast Asia, an increase of infrastructure spend to link Central Asia to Southeast Asia, and increasing investments in the Middle East, Africa, again to connect those regions with Asia, and to some extent in South America to a lesser degree.
So let's zoom into the RCEP for a second. That was quite a feat. We're talking about 10 ASEAN nations plus 5 major economies across the broader region. But ASEAN people think about it as a block, but it's really not a block from 5,000 GDP per capita from Indonesia all the way down. Which ASEAN nation do you think represent the biggest growth opportunity in the coming decade?
That's an interesting question. I think there's two ways to answer that. The RCEP agreement includes major economies such as Japan, South Korea. I think that there is a question mark over the participation perhaps of Australia and New Zealand. I feel that they may potentially fall out of that deal. But Japan and South Korea, on the other hand, and they're looking for cheaper finishing of products. And that will benefit, first of all, the consumers in those markets because the costs will reduce. But it will also affect the labor and factories being put into place in some of the smaller ASEAN nations. And I think that Cambodia, Laos will benefit from being able to finish products because the labor is cheaper that have originally been manufactured in Japan, South Korea, and of course China. So it depends which way you look at it. There's benefits for the larger, well-established nations in terms of sourcing less expensive production capabilities. And there's also benefits for the smaller ASEAN economies, especially of being able to develop their workforce and their production capabilities in terms of finishing products. So in this instance, I think that there really is, as the Chinese like to say, a win-win situation with the RCEP agreement. I think it works on both sides.
How much of a role that China has actually played in pulling this RCEP agreement together? Because I know that China, Japan, and South Korea, just the three countries alone, we have been discussing about a trilateral free trade agreement for a long time, and it's never come to fruition. So how did it all happen now? Just because simply by adding in ASEAN and all of a sudden these three nations have a free trade agreement now?
China has played a hugely influential role in putting all that together. But I think the Japanese also were a major diplomatic force in putting this together. China needs Japan. Japan has superior technologies in many industries, but Japan also needs China. Its consumer market is significant. So I think that applause has to be given on all sides of all participants in that. So yes, significant efforts on behalf of Beijing.
A lot of people say that RCEP is actually a low bar FTA agreement. So how is it low bar? What is included and what is not?
Well, yeah, whatever people do, there's always critics. Some of the intellectual property issues within RCEP are perhaps less strong than they have been intended to be within the CTPP. So there has been some criticism about that. However, RCEP has been signed. It is in effect, and one can always make adjustments to it. So I think the really interesting thing is that RCEP is on the statute, it is agreed, and it's easier to make adjustments, perhaps to strengthen areas where it is weak, than it is to completely come up with a totally new agreement. So I think the important thing is not to look necessarily at the weaknesses, because they can be renegotiated and dealt with over time. The important thing is to understand that it is in place, and despite some deficiencies, it is real, it is valid, and it can be used.
And just on this question now, with the CPTPP, China has clearly expressed its interest in joining the CPTPP, which is actually a higher bar agreement. So let's say when both of the agreements come into effect, how would the trade relationships be recalibrated? Some countries will be included in both, some countries will be excluded. How does that work out?
Right, it's an interesting hybrid, isn't it? I agree with your questioning on this. But as you say, the CTPPP has got higher bars, and countries, some of the smaller nations that we discussed earlier, such as Cambodia, Laos, and others, may find it difficult to come up to those sorts of standards. On the other hand, We have other nations, the United Kingdom, after Brexit, is also looking at joining the CPTPP. And there's been some call even for Russia, the Russian Far East is a significant area, perhaps to also look at joining that. Frankly, I think that Russia and China are going to be looking at their partnership, their existing trade agreement with the Eurasian Economic Union and getting tariff reductions into that. But for sure, the CPTPP, I agree with you. It does have a higher bar. It will mean that some countries within the RCEP agreement will be excluded from that until they can get their standards in place. And it does mean that other nations that are perhaps wealthier and more compliant with international standards, such as the United Kingdom, will become part of that. It's a work in progress, and I look forward to seeing how this is going to pan out. But exciting times, I think, for Asia overall. We've got RCEP, CPTPP is coming down the line, and I think this is good news.
I think the general theme over there, as you mentioned, Chris, is trade opening in the broader Asian region. But let's talk about the investment space for a second. With a series of various decouplings between particularly China and the United States, do you see American companies moving their supply chains out of China at the moment?
No, we don't see that. My firm handles significant numbers of American and other clients coming into China. There's been a lot of media talk about US companies leaving, and to some extent, the US companies that have been sourcing cheap products in China to sell back to the United States, they've gone. There's no market for them there because of the trade differences. But for American companies that want to sell to China, and China's consumer market is significant and is still growing, middle-class consumer market, there are significant opportunities in China. So those supply chains are not being eroded. And actually, I think last year, China's FDI, despite the fact that there were trade sanctions and the COVID situation, reached record levels. So I think that a lot of what we're seeing in the press is erroneous. What we see on the ground is American investment continuing to go into China. It's just that the nature of that investment has changed insofar as much that those companies going in are looking to sell and access Chinese consumers.
However, Apple did move its supply chains out of China to India, I believe, and IBM just closed its labs in China.
So if you're looking for to manufacture global products which can be sold to the global market, then there are certainly some cases, and particularly within IT, computing industry, AI, for some, whereby the supply chains will need to be moved. And they're moving to other areas or other countries which have perhaps more friendly relationships with the United States and have a significant digital and IT capability. India is one of those, although its relations with the US could be better. And there are others. Some supply chains are changing, and especially within IT because of the issues with semiconductors, but others are staying in place. So the way to read this really is, if you are a business and you're interested in the Chinese consumer market, you have to go to China, and we're seeing that happening and continuing to happen from the US. If you want to secure global supplies for a global market and also to the US, then you may need to reconsider your supply chains. And as you so correctly mentioned,
FDI, China, as you mentioned, became the world's largest FDI destination since 2020, and it remains so far. What were the incremental growth areas in China last year that bumped up the FDI investments?
The FDI figures were achieved as a result of an ongoing process of urbanization, which has been taking place in China for the past 15 to 20 years. So China becomes more urbanized, the consumer demand increases, wealth has been created in China, as we know. And I think that the demand by Chinese consumers, which were not particularly badly hit by COVID, probably spurred that.
within China, there has been an increasing number of free trade zones. Let's just use the Greater Bay Area. What are some of the newer policies that are being experimented in the Greater Bay Area that are interesting and attractive for foreign companies?
China has launched a series of Hong Kong Connect schemes, which are pretty much all financial services related. And in order to have seamless transactions between Hong Kong under one system, international money coming in, and mainland China, a different system with the renminbi being supreme, there has to be legislation involved. And Hong Kong has been given a great opportunity to provide financial services in a whole array of different styles, and to position itself as a financial services center that can access China's estimated $3 trillion worth of personal private wealth. So that is a major initiative for Hong Kong, and it changes to some degree the nature of what Hong Kong does. There are other incentives as well in the Greater Bay Area, which have to do with tax reductions for companies which are operating there, profits tax reductions, as well as incentives for specialized individuals to be able to relocate and work within the Greater Bay Area. And again, these revolve around specific personal income tax reductions, which are available for qualified personnel to relocate to that region.
I read your BRI guidebook. The African ports that China has developed has been astronomical, 74 ports. I think people are really interested in that. So tell us about China's port developments in Africa.
Well, the whole development of Africa is a really interesting play. And the reason that's come about is partly because India has missed an opportunity to inherit the workshop of the world mantle that China has had for many years. And it's missed that opportunity through internal protectionist policies by many of its corporates who do not want to see Chinese or indeed other foreign companies compete in India for Indian consumers. So China has long tried to get India on board with trade, and I think several years ago decided that Africa would be the better option. To do that, China had to do several things. Put in the infrastructure, including the ports that you mentioned, and they pretty much circle Africa now, but also put in other infrastructure, roads, rail, which is all being put into place, free trade zones. China was also heavily influential in the development of the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, which came into effect from January the 1st this year. That free trade agreement basically unified or did away with intra-African tariffs on trade between different countries in Africa. And there are 55 different countries in Africa. Before, if you transported goods across borders, a tariff or a duty would have to be paid. That's all been scrapped, and the Chinese were influential in making that happen. What that does, Africa is a huge continent with all sorts of different commodities, minerals, products, everything that you can imagine can be sourced there. It means that you can go to Africa with a shopping list of all the things that you want to buy to make your product or products, put them all together in one place near one of the ports you mentioned, perhaps add in Chinese or other products, maybe from the Middle East or perhaps even from Europe, put all those together and then manufacture a finished product which can either be resold back onto the African market or re-exported. And I think that the significance of what's happening with that Africa has not yet been fully understood in the wider world. But it is Africa rather than India that I think is going to inherit the workshop of the world mantle. And I think we'll see that really start to move by the end of this decade. There are people which will be watching this podcast today who have no idea that their careers will be in Africa at the end of this decade. But that is what's going to be happening.
So just give us a sense, Chris, 74 ports along both sides of the African coast. How many ports are there in Africa? Is China essentially owning almost all of them?
Well, I think of those 74 ports, some of those are not particularly significant, but there are certainly, I think, 23 which are deep water ports, And those are really the ones to be looking at. Africa also has some issues to resolve. In the northeast, there's conflict there. China has also put in some military bases. There's a couple of them in Northeast Africa to protect shipping. Issues such as Somalia need to be resolved. But for sure, the ports, mainly on the east coast of Africa, Kenya, Tanzania, and so on, are going to be significant parts of the Belt and Road, and the trade between Africa and Asia is going to boom. On the northwest coast, and to some extent the western coast, Nigeria, there's also going to be significant improvement in African productivity and being able to export its goods. From the west coast of Africa, of course, it's easier to access Europe, and I think that that's really what's going to be happening. The Made in Africa label, if we can imagine one, is going to be on our clothes within a decade. So, but it's going to be Chinese ports and that investment in them and the management of those that is going to be a key component of getting all this organized and operational.
Europe. What's going to happen with the China-EU CAI?
That's a loaded question. I think that the EU has got to get its priorities right as concerns its attitude to China. But I think if you're going to accuse a country and its leaders of genocide and put sanctions on them, and at the same time want to have a trade agreement, I think that's very naive. I think you have to do either one or the other. The EU put itself in this position. China didn't put itself in this position. So I think that's an issue for the European diplomats to resolve. It's a curious case, and I think that the European Union has not always been consistent. They need to have a consistent approach, and at the moment, the EU hasn't been providing that. And as a consequence, I think the CAI is in some doubt.
Last week, during the call between Xi and Merkel, it seems that Merkel is even more anxious in culminating the CAI. How much of a role does Merkel and Germany play in Europe today in pulling this China-EU CAI together?
I think Merkel, when you have a politician that's at the end of their career, I think inevitably there are people behind the scenes that start to diminish their stature. And I'm sure that President Xi will be aware of that. So Merkel is a declining force in EU politics. Now, the case then is, well, who's going to replace that? And there's a little bit of a tussle going on, not just within German politics, but also with France. Emmanuel Macron, I think, wants to be seen as the senior political leader in the EU. I think that there are some issues with Ursula as the head of the European Commission. I think that she's made some strategic mistakes over COVID, but have undermined her position as well. So I think that there are some questions of the EU leadership as to how they're going to present a united face to China. What China wants is clarity, and it's not getting that from the European Union at the moment.
So down to the details of the CAI, why are they so excited about it? What are the key components in there that we don't have currently?
The CAI is a bilateral investment treaty. It's not actually such a big deal. It's not a free trade agreement, but it is a significant, it's significant, I think, in its political statement that show that the European Union and China have been able to agree on vested interests in investing in each other's areas. So a BIT, a bilateral investment treaty, which is what the CAI is, basically protects investors from one country or one area, such as the EU, into another, such as China. It also provides protections for Chinese businesses investing into the EU. But it is not a free trade agreement. Although the media have talked it up because of a political significance, which now seems to be in doubt, about two huge blocs actually managing to agree something, that now seems to be clouded in some mist. Ideal in international trade and handle the tax and legal aspects to go along with that. Am I, or am I firm, particularly excited about the CAI? The answer is not especially. I don't think it makes a huge amount of difference. A free trade agreement, now that would be something to write home about. The CAI, I don't think it really does make much difference.
Chris, you wrote a 140-some pages book, the BRI guidebook, which was launched last week. Why should people read your book?
People should read my book, particularly if they're involved in business as opposed to politics. This book tells people how to, and shows people how to take advantage of the opportunities created by the Belt and Road Initiative. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that people need to invest in the Belt and Road Initiative or even to do business with China. What I discuss within this book is how the Belt and Road Initiative has come to develop ports, build infrastructure, and where those opportunities lie. I'll give you one example, quick example. The Colombo Port City in Sri Lanka is being developed as Chinese money. It's part of a Belt and Road Initiative. The Chinese leased an area of land which was subsequently reclaimed at China's cost. They're building a smart city there. Now, Sri Lanka is strategically placed in Asia. It's just off the coast of India, but it's also just off the coast of ASEAN to the east. So it's got a great position for servicing Southeast Asia and India. The Colombo Port City is going to be acting, I think, with the buildings going up, the vertical build, which is now starting to be put into place. That will become like a de facto back office for Singapore. Now, Singapore is a global financial services center, and especially so in Asia. But why have your back office operations in Singapore, which is a small country and land is extremely expensive? Why have your back office operations there when you can put them into a cheaper location, such as the Colombo Port City? And what's been happening there is that the land prices that are available both in the port city and around the outskirts of that, they've been going up significantly. So here's an opportunity for investors, real estate developers, or perhaps other businesses to exploit that infrastructure which has been put in place, buy property, perhaps rent a shop and put in a computer servicing business, all the things that people need that they're going to go and work in the Colombo Port City. That's going to need all the infrastructure that employees going to work there need to do their business and to live and work and do that effectively. So that's really where, that's an example, just one example of where opportunities lie within the Belt and Road Initiative. And if people are interested in learning how to exploit what China has been doing, and I really do mean that, exploit it, then I think that there are some significant financial investments and returns on investments that can be made on a global basis through the Belt and Road Initiative. And if you're interested in making money, if you're a businessman, if you're an investor, this is the only book that tells you how to do that. And that's why you should read it.
Chris Devonshire-Ellis, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much as well.